Berserk is a series that's absolutely stacked with battles. Feels like every character in this universe is constantly fighting for their lives, and that got us thinking, what are the most iconic battles in Berserk? Well, there are many amazing action sequences in the series. The opening arc, which is about 9 chapters long, has maybe 2 chapters without major fights. But which of these fights have reached full iconic status? Well, we've got our thoughts on this matter, and we're going to give them to you guys now. So, without further ado, these are the 10 most iconic battles in all of Berserk. Before we go any further, we want to just clarify that these are our opinions on the matter. It's completely subjective, but we'd be more than happy to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. So with that out of the way, let's get right to it. Guts vs 100 Tudor Knights. The Eclipse sadly won't be making an appearance in this video, and the reason for that should be quite apparent. It's not a battle, it's a one-sided massacre. The Apostles absolutely trounced the Band of the Falcon, and Guts himself would have died had Skull Knight not rescued him and Casca from that dimension. Instead, first on the list, we have a fight that could have been a one-sided massacre too, but the Black Swordsman was luckier because his enemies were all human. The night that Guts defeated 100 Tudor Knights by himself is what the stuff of legend is made of. This happened way before he got his hands on Dragon Slayer or any of his other equipment, when all he had was a longsword. After surviving an engagement with Tudor's Blue Whale Knights, Guts and Casca run into an ambush where 100 men in full plate armor, and with a decent amount of weapon proficiency at the very least, were lying in wait for them. Guts and Casca's opening salvo went well enough, but things quickly turned sideways when the behemoth Samson appeared and started swinging his Morning Star like a madman. Instead of dodging the attacks and closing the gap, Guts opted to deflect all of Samson's swings with his sword because he felt it was his duty to defend Casca. This moment marked the beginning of their romance because though he told her that wasn't the case, she knew he was lying. After taking care of Samson and a few other lackeys, he tells Casca to get a move on and vows to defeat all of the men standing in front of him. As he does this, he asks himself whether he's doing it for her and then just blacks out when he turns on autopilot mode. We see a good chunk of the beginning of the fight, but we don't see its end. However, we don't need to because a glimpse at the aftermath is more than enough. When Casca returns with reinforcements, Judo is shocked at the sight in front of him. The forest looks like it was hit by a hurricane, and 100 men in full armor were lying dead in front of him. This became the night that the 100-Man Slayer was born, and this battle is so iconic that it influenced an in-universe character to become a warrior. Isidro claims that the raider captain of the Band of the Falcon is his inspiration for wanting to learn the way of the sword, because in his mind, that guy killed 1,000 enemies by himself. He doesn't even know that he's traveling with his inspiration, but that just goes to show you how legends and myths are born. Though people don't recognize him immediately anymore, as soon as they realize who Guts is, they can't help but be in awe of the 100-Man Slayer, which is why this fight is among the most iconic battles in the series, at least in our opinion. Guts vs Serpico. Some of you might question our inclusion of Guts' tussle with Serpico because they've only fought twice and he won both times. But to us, there isn't a single duel in the series that highlights its combatants' contrasting natures as well as Guts vs Serpico. The pair first met when the Holy Iron Chain Knights captured Guts after he hunted down Rosine. Serpico took an immediate dislike to Guts because he made Farnace uneasy and upset, and when he learned that he'd kidnapped her from the camp, he vowed to do something about it. After recovering his lady from him, shaken but safe, Serpico drew his weapon on Guts to fire off a warning shot and did something simply incredible. Both of them had the same idea, and Serpico had the smaller weapon, which meant that dexterity would be the only way he would survive this tip-off, so to speak. As soon as he went for Guts' face, the Black Swordsman swung Dragon Slayer for Serpico's legs. If he was a regular fighter, we'd have a disabled secondary character at this point, but Serpico read that sword swing like a book and jumped while delivering his attack. He praised Guts' draw speed regardless because even lugging Dragon Slayer around seemed impossible, but Guts' respect for him was more surprising. He discovered in that moment that Serpico was extremely well trained, and he's been wanting to settle things with him ever since. Their first proper duel, which took place outside the secret passage of the Heretic Cave in St. Albion, was one of the briefest yet most impressive engagements of the series. Serpico cleverly analyzed all of Guts' equipment and ambushed him on a narrow mountain track where he and his thin rapier would have the advantage. He then unleashed a flurry of attacks on Guts, who was pinned down thanks to his heavy gear and massive sword. If he'd been anyone else, he'd have probably had his brain skewered by Serpi, but Guts being Guts, simply grabbed the rapier and broke it with his iron arm. He then shot off repeater crossbow bolts in Serpico's direction, but this guy was nimble enough to not only get out of the way, but pickpocket a mini bomb off of Guts, light it, and use it as a distraction to get away. That seems cowardly, but it highlights Serpico's strength as a fighter, which is his ability to think ahead of his enemy. He comes up with the perfect scenario to attack and win, and he usually only fights people to a draw because he's that good at it. Their final battle was even more epic, and Serpico used his environmental advantage to the fullest, but Guts is practically unbeatable by that point. Still, his respect for Serpico grows further because the guy nearly pushed him into using the Berserker armor. We prefer their mountain track battle the most because it showcases how battles aren't all about brute force. Quite a bit of thinking and intelligence is involved as well, and Serpico embodies those latter concepts while Guts embodies the former. Their contrast itself is what makes their duels so enjoyable, and we think everyone can agree when we say that they're great rivals for each other. Guts and Griffith versus Zodd. Speaking of rivals, one of the earliest apostle encounters of the series, at least from a chronological standpoint, is when Guts' raiding party comes across a monstrous man guarding the inner citadel of a Tudor castle. After losing 50 of his men, Guts decides to go in and see what's keeping them, and what he discovers that day would change his life forever. Their opponent seemed more beast than man, with such bizarre strength that he had 3 of Guts' raiders impaled on his sword. When the swordsman engaged the enemy, his monstrous strength rattled Guts' bones, and he had to bet everything on a risky trade of blows. His gamble paid off because he broke through his enemy's weapon and embedded his own within their shoulder. But that's when the real nightmare began, because this change of events delighted Nosferatu Zodd so much that he decided to assume his real form as a demon. Guts became so shocked by his transformation that he could only stay on the defense while he was swung into stone pillars. If Griffith had arrived a second too late, he'd have died. But it's not like the Falcon fared much better. Griffith managed to get to Guts and used a division tactic to score a serious hit on Zodd's left arm, but he was knocked out cold by that same arm and targeted as his first victim of the two. Zodd was sad to lose such fine warriors so soon after having met them, but then he spots the necklace around Griffith's neck, and that changes everything. Zodd realizes that he has become embroiled in a matter of fate, so he spares his victims and warns them of the coming doom. This is the first time that Guts becomes aware of the existence of demons and the possibility of the eclipse, and the 1997 anime does his battle complete justice. It absolutely nails the eerie and ominous atmosphere of Guts and Griffith versus Zodd, and this battle will go down in history as one of the most important and iconic battles in all of Berserk. It sets up the character arcs of 3 major characters and introduced several important concepts so subtly that you can't help but admire Miura's storytelling skills, and that's why we love it so much. The Battle for Doldrey. This is one of the only proper battles that we see unfolding from beginning to end, and that alone is enough to make it iconic. But the Battle for Doldrey is extremely important from not just a narrative perspective, but also a historical perspective. Miura did an excellent job of building up Doldrey as this impenetrable castle that was a crucial target for the Kingdom of Midland during the 100-Year War. That military meeting where Griffith volunteers the Falcons for the mission is one of only a few such scenes that we see in Berserk, and the way the Falcon masterfully plays that room is a thing to remember. The actual battle itself also showcases Griffith's ingenuity beautifully, while giving us a couple of satisfying mini-boss battles and a rather disturbing twist of fate. The White Falcon uses his raider unit and his main man Guts to draw out the bulk of Doldrey's forces into the field. He knows that their general might be a good military strategist, but their actual leader would want them to abandon tactics and hunt down Griffith. That's because it was none other than Governor Gennon, the man to whom Griffith sold his body in exchange for gold, and the Falcon knew that a lecher like him wouldn't risk losing someone like Griffith. When the main defensive force had been drawn out, a contingent force led by Casca would secure the castle, and the main force would stand at the bank of a river and mow down the Purple Rhino Knights. Casca got an opportunity for payback on the Tudor knight named Adon, who had humiliated her, threatened her virtue, and promised to make her a harlot in his army. She cut him down skillfully despite getting drugged by him, and this part of Griffith's operation was a massive success. With Doldrey in his hands, the Tudor had no place to hide and only 2 choices left. Either they fought to the death in an attempt to wipe out the Falcons, or they ran away and abandoned their posts. Despite outnumbering them massively, The Purple Rhino Knights failed to win against the Band of the Falcon, though they came real close when their general Boscon nearly beat Guts in a one-on-one battle after breaking his sword. What saved the swordsman was the last-minute interruption made by Zodd, who threw his own sword onto the battlefield to replace the one Guts had lost. The battle for Doldrey was the crown jewel of Griffith's campaign, and every anime depiction of it is iconic, in our opinion. It was a rare occasion when Miura decided to give us spectacle on a massive scale because he usually tones things down with the numbers. But the Battle of Doldrey was a rare treat from those early days of Berserk. Guts versus Mozgus. The Conviction arc is considered by many to be the peak of Berserk, and this fight is a big reason for that. When Mozgus was introduced initially, we felt kind of disappointed that he wasn't an apostle because humans were no match for Guts at that stage in his life. So when he got his pseudo-upgrade, we couldn't hide our happiness because it meant that the playing field was now level. The fight to reach Mozgus was a 4-against-1 scenario where Guts went absolutely apeshit on people's asses no matter how battered he was. And then he faced the Mad Priest in what has to be one of the most morally complex battles in Berserk. Mozgus was a holy man who had committed mass murder and was being powered by the essence of evil, contrary to what he thought. Guts was a man who rejected God and yet kept fighting for what was right against all odds, going so far as to put himself within death's jaws just to shut them down from the inside. The fact that the crowd around St. Albion was cheering Mozgus and antagonizing Guts just put the ignorance of humanity on full display, because if they knew that Mozgus was partly responsible for the collapse of St. Albion, they wouldn't have been calling him Lord Angel. Apart from the symbolism, this battle is also one of the more trying tests on Guts' path of vengeance, because Mozgus might have been a pseudo, but his powers rivaled those of some of the strongest apostles. He had manifested an armor that was literally unbreakable, and its protection extended to Mozgus' insides as well. When Guts couldn't make a dent on his body with Dragon Slayer, he tried stabbing him through the mouth, but Mozgus caught his weapon and chomped down on it to keep it in place. The angel wings he used in his new base form turned into giant hands reminiscent of Sasuke's fully released Curse Seal stage, and he used them even more efficiently than the Uchiha lad. Mozgus' wing arms could open up into 1,000 limbs and attack Guts simultaneously, giving him almost no space to recover. The only vulnerable part of his body was his eyes, and blinding him wouldn't kill him, which is why Guts panicked against a demon for the first time in a long time. He won this battle through sheer luck, when he realized there was a chink in Mozgus' armor, and he exploited that to turn the demonic angel into a stack of flames. Guts' victory over the Mad Priest didn't win him any admirers, because the humans of St. Albion were well beyond reason, but from a symbolic perspective, it showed us the artist's viewpoint on the concept of good and evil quite clearly. Kentaro Miura was a master of visual storytelling, and in many ways, Guts vs. Mozgus represents the peak of that ability of his. That's why we've included it on our list, despite there being other, perhaps more action-packed apostle battles in the series. Battle for Vritannis. This 24-hour battle sequence is one of the longest sequences in Berserk, but it's also a glorious example of escalation and outright madness. What started as a search for a ship ended with the fall of an emperor and the rise of a new one, with the main factor departing the shores of the battle before its conclusion. The invasion of Vritannis was Emperor Ganishka's final military objective in the west, after which he would have consolidated his control over the entire world and become second only to Geiserik. But he was doomed to failure, because he didn't factor in the most unpredictable element of the series into his plans, that element being Guts. The battle started in Vritannis' ballroom, where Ganishka sent a few Pishacha to quickly dispatch of the nobles who were all gathered in one place. When the Black Swordsman party thwarted that plan, it shifted to Vritannis' harbor, where Shirke used a fiery spirit wheel to burn several Daka and Pishacha to death. Before they could escape, the Black Swordsman party was attacked by a dozen Makara, and Guts entered Berserk mode to deal with all of them. As soon as that was done, he and Serpico and Shirke were attacked by Daiba, who controlled the largest magical creature we've seen to date, the water spirit called Kundalini. After taking out the old magician with a combination of youth and deception, the good guys were forced to fight the Dread Emperor himself, and Guts was on the brink of being fried out of existence when reinforcements arrived from the most unexpected source. Griffith's war demons entered the battlefield, and Guts actually teamed up with Zodd to take down Ganishka so he and his friends could leave Vritannis and go to Elfhelm. Even then, things were far from over at Vritannis, because as soon as morning came, Ganishka descended upon the city with 250,000 men, but even that attack was thwarted by the arrival of the reborn Band of the Falcon. Griffith's forces caused chaos among the Emperor's ranks, and he made his way to Ganishka's mobile palace himself to set the stage for their final battle. When you read through this part of Berserk, you might be forgiven for thinking things are happening several days apart, but Guts' departure from Vritannis and Griffith's arrival occur within mere hours of each other, and everything that happens during the Battle of Vritannis is just peak Berserk action. We haven't seen such a massive battle between so many parties unfolding at one location to date from the series, but because we're clubbing several different battles into one here, we kind of feel like we're cheating a bit. That's why we've placed this battle at 5th, but its position doesn't diminish our love for it. The Battle of Vritannis is exactly the kind of successor that the Battle of Doldrey required, and it's wonderful poetic irony that Guts and Griffith ended up working together once more, as indirect as it might have been. Guts versus Grunbeld. This entry and its position on this list can be summed up with just 3 words: Berserker Armor Debut. That's it, that's the entry, and if we left it at that, we're sure none of you would even complain. But there are other layers to Guts vs. Grunbeld that make it one of our top 4 most iconic Berserk battles, so we'll peel those off one at a time. For starters, Grunbeld is kinda like the new Guts. He's arguably Griffith's strongest soldier, and he has the fire to match that title. When we say fire, we mean it literally, because Grunbeld's apostle form is a gigantic corundum-skinned dragon. His fight with Guts was perfectly set up to showcase the powers of the Berserker armor, because without it, Guts was one hammer swing away from death at all times. When he engaged Grunbeld by himself, he couldn't even parry his attacks properly. That's how much weight they had behind him. The best thing he could do was rely on his allies to create distractions so he could heal up, because that's how badly battered he already was. But as soon as he put on the Berserker armor, he turned into a whole new entity of death and showed Grunbeld why apostles all over the globe fear him as the Black Swordsman. His strength, speed, agility, mobility, everything had increased, and Grunbeld couldn't believe Guts broke through his massive shield cannon with just a couple of targeted blows. When Guts dented his hammer and rendered it useless, that's when he acknowledged the guy and assumed his apostle form, but the surprises weren't done yet. Instead of backing down from the dragon, Guts charged headfirst and managed to stop Grunbeld's extremely heavy tail by himself. The Berserker armor rearranged his limbs because stopping the impact broke them, but that didn't reduce Guts' power by any metric. He landed an attack that was so devastating that it cracked Grunbeld's corundum skin, and corundum is supposed to be the 3rd hardest naturally occurring ore in the world. If he'd kept at it, he might have been cooked to death, but luckily, he was brought back to his senses. Guts grabbed his companions and escaped the battlefield, but by then, Miura had already accomplished what he intended to. Miura knew now that Griffith was back in the physical world, he needed to give Guts an upgrade, because he couldn't take down a deity with just grit and guts. That's why he came up with the Berserker armor, and having him use it on Grunbeld, one of Griffith's strongest apostles, was the right decision to display its terrifying power. The debut of this most wretched of weapons hasn't been animated the way we wanted it to be animated, we admit it, but we don't exactly care, because reading through this fight in the manga is more than enough for us. Guts vs. Grunbeld was iconic the moment it began, but by the end, it had achieved legendary status. Guts versus Griffith. In many ways, this is the battle that started it all, so we'd be remiss if we didn't include it on our list. But this isn't a combination of every fight Guts and Griffith have ever had. If that were the case, then their duel before Guts left the Falcons and their duel from Elfhelm would represent 2 extremes, because both of them were examples of complete victory and complete defeat. In the former scenario, Guts emerged victorious, and in the latter, it was Griffith. We're talking about the 2nd time Guts and Griffith crossed swords with one another, because that was the duel that formed the narrative of Berserk itself. Guts was still recovering from a fatal wound, and Griffith knew he wasn't a match for him in terms of raw strength, but his skill would prove to be superior. We still have dreams about that panel where Miura depicted Griffith moving his sword so swiftly that it left after images in its wake, and that other panel where he stands on top of Guts' sword. Guts isn't the kind of opponent that you can treat with such impunity, and even if he was injured, it usually wouldn't make a difference. Except in this case, it did, because Griffith was skilled enough to take full advantage of every opportunity presented to him. He didn't even shy away from a fist fight when things devolved to that stage, because his desire to acquire Guts was so strong. And at this point in the series, he could have said that he was the best swordsman in the world, and it would have been true. The way he easily manhandled Guts into a submission position and then casually dislocated his shoulder like it was nothing, maybe we should have named this entry Griffith vs. Guts. But it wasn't as though our favorite swordsman didn't get a few iconic moments of his own. That panel where Guts stopped stops Griffith's saber with his bare teeth is pure adrenaline fuel, and so is the fact that he's the only person who's landed a clean punch on Griffith's face to date. This battle can be reanimated 1,000 times, and we'd still watch every iteration because that's how foundational it is to Berserk. And if the current state of the series is any kind of proof, then the inevitable rematch will be even better, at which point we might have to revise this list. Guts versus Zodd. Okay, so we know we've already used the word peak in this list, and quite a few times at that, but trust us when we say Guts vs. Zodd at the Hill of Swords is the actual peak of Berserk combat. That's because it shows us everything we want to see from a scene like this. Progress, incredible action, incredible character work, and a dissatisfying conclusion. The Black Swordsman meets the Beast Swordsman face to face 3 years after their first encounter in that Tudor fortress. He'd seen Zodd a couple of times since, but he never got the opportunity to fight him, and on one of those occasions, he was actually scared of the Immortal's presence. At the Hill of Swords, though, things were different, because Guts could now test the results of his relentless journey against the demon who started it all. Zodd gave himself a bit of a handicap by using a ramdao as a weapon, because ramdaos are typically crafted to perform sacrifices, but the symbolic theme is absolutely on point, because Guts improved as a swordsman due to being a sacrifice. Zodd himself comments on his growth and is mightily impressed by him, which, believe it or not, is a huge compliment. Nosferatu Zodd might be a feral beast, but he respects strength and technique above all. He's a warrior who seeks the ultimate challenge, and it delights his heart that something as weak as a human is rising to the occasion. Their first exchange is so intense that Rickert, who's watching this unfold, is baffled by Guts' progress. He knows that Zodd is a near mythical demon after encountering him as a falcon, but the fact that Guts can not only parry his attacks with Dragonslayer, but also press him by using his environment is nothing short of unreal. The two veteran warriors use the swords strewn around them as grave markers to negate each other's advantages, and Guts actually fights Zodd to a stalemate when he snaps the ramdao in two. Zodd is overjoyed by this because he's had his fill as a human. He unleashes his apostle form on Guts, and while things devolve quickly thereafter, everything up until this point was a pure masterclass in swordsmanship. Guts vs. Zodd is the one rivalry we want to see play out more than anything else because they actually have the same dream. Zodd has been searching for the absolute definition of strength for 3 centuries, and before the eclipse, Guts decided to keep testing himself against stronger and stronger opponents to see if he really was as good as he thought he was. In their own way, they both pursue their own definition of strength, and a climactic battle between them would give us more joy than if Zodd decided to settle the score with Skull Knight. Sure, those two might have a longer history, but the stakes are juicier with Guts involved. And no, we're not talking about cuts of meat. The fact that they've delayed their eventual battles so many times tells us that they want this more than anything else too. So we hope that we get yet another iconic battle between these two ferocious swordsmen. This brings us to our final choice, which might surprise some of you guys, but let us explain, because we've got our reasons. Guts versus Wyald. In our opinion, the most iconic fight in all of Berserk is also the one that can never be animated, and that's Guts and the Band of the Falcon versus Wyald. The reason we've placed this particular battle at the top of our list is quite simple. It's the purest expression of the ideal Berserk has been chasing since 1988. Let's put the chase scene to the side because, while that's also amazing, it isn't a direct engagement between two enemies. It's one group running into the other's ambushes because said group's leader is a madman. The real battle begins when Guts singles out Wyald, and the Apostle uses a damn club to counter everything the swordsman throws at him. This is Guts a year after he went off on his peregrination, mind you, and he'd become far more skilled than he was the first time he fought against Zodd. And yet, he was shocked that Wyald could keep up with him using nothing but reflexes, which set the stage for this encounter between a human and an inhuman. Things heated up like a furnace when Wyald entered his Apostle form, because he replaced that club with a friggin' tree, and he turned into a damn demon gorilla. The rest of the Falcons could only stare at him in disbelief because they instinctively knew that they had no chance against this guy. Guts stepped forward to fight him by himself, and remember, this is Guts with minimal armor, no metal arm or arm cannon, no repeater crossbow, and most importantly, no Dragon Slayer. All he had was his greatsword, which was massive and well constructed as well, but it didn't pack nearly as much power as Dragon Slayer does. And still, Guts was able to defeat Wyald pretty much without any help because he didn't give up and he used technique and tactical deception to get his mark, like a true swordsman. Don't get us wrong, he had to go go through a world of hell before he dealt that finishing blow because Wyald beat him with and also into several trees, even knocking him out on one occasion. But Guts managed to bait him into attacking his armor and leapt at his head with his sword. He broke it in the process of stabbing Wyald, but even as he got pounded by his hands, he didn't stop the attack. Guts threw literally everything he had at this guy, and he emerged victorious as a human with nothing special on him. This was the first and only time we saw him actually wound an apostle mortally with his old weapon, and it's iconic because this is how Guts wants to be deep down. During this fight, his blade wasn't weighed down by the perceived responsibility of protecting others. In fact, it was made stronger by that fact, and he was able to beat an inhuman monster through sheer perseverance. To us, it's a shame that none of the Wyald stuff will ever get adapted because the fight itself is among the best in all of Berserk. Despite fighting with a massive disadvantage, like he always does, Guts somehow manages to tough it out and emerge victorious in a situation that was impossible to handle for mortals like him. Now, yes, Wyald was finished off by Zodd because he tried to kill Griffith, and that was an iconic moment itself because Zodd gave Griffith the hint he needed to activate his Behelit. But nobody can dispute that Wyald would have died anyways because he says it himself. Guts completely defeated him to the point that he did something as cowardly as taking a mangled man hostage, but that's just a testament to his inhuman tenacity. That's why the Black Swordsman's battle against Wyald is the most iconic battle in Berserk, at least in our opinion. Marvelous verdict. But that's enough from us. What do you guys think? We know we've missed out on a lot of your favorite Berserk battles probably, so let us know your top 10 lists in the comments down below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more Berserk content, and we'll see you guys soon with another video. Until then, stay safe and remember to keep on struggling, strugglers.